Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is Let's Rant with Scrapper playing American Truck Simulator. We are on our way. We're still level 1, a newbie, trying to gain some XP before we make a purchase. Let's take a look at the world map. There's not much on it, right? All the yellow is where we have been, and of course, we haven't been anywhere else. We also haven't discovered any truck agencies yet, I think, which is maybe going to make it difficult to buy our first truck, but it might be the case that they'll give us our first Western Star truck when the time comes. But until then, we have to take loads as they're offered. I do want to point out we do have now Walmart and the Home Depot and BP and a bunch of real world companies because apparently I just had the mod got deactivated somehow. So all we can do right now is take quick jobs because we don't have our own truck. And we're in Oklahoma City, I think, but I don't know that it matters. So let's pick another city we haven't been to. Let's say Tulsa. See if we can get a load from Tulsa and see where we're going to go with it. It doesn't look like we're going to Tulsa. Whoops. All right, let's try this again. So let's try again. And how about we try McAllister? Not a lot. All right, let's try Enid. Nothing is leaving Enid. Woodward. Nothing's leaving. A lot of things are leaving Oklahoma City, though, so let's try Oklahoma City then. I guess that's where we started. And we're trying to get a good pay per mile, but we also want to get a good amount. So let's go back to Austin. Or are we just going back to the same route? We're going a little further, so that's okay. We're going to be working for the Home Depot. Let's go ahead and take the job. And this will get us 8,000 bucks, and that will increase our total by 80% or whatever, because we have about 10,000 right now. One advantage of doing the quick jobs is there aren't a lot of ways that you burn the money, because you don't really have to pay for your own gas. You don't have to pay for your own garage. You don't have to pay the other drivers because you don't have any. But it does take a while to build up the money to get a truck of your own. All right, so let's go ahead and put this into drive, and let's hit 2, and we'll take a look. We're at Home Depot, and we are driving this rig, which is an international truck, I believe. And so let's go ahead and head out. And I'm going to stay in this view, and we'll try not to hit anything as we go. And I will, once we get started, I will go ahead with our rant today, which is going to be about companies and why so many of them seem to be unable to produce the type of content that the company and the genre or whatever was known for. And this actually comes by way of a video about Star Wars movies, I think, where the person was referencing a comment by former DC Comics president, somebody I actually didn't like when he was president of DC, Dan DiDio, who made a pretty important comment that I think is true. He was talking about comic books and comic book movie franchises, but it's true not only of those, but also of role-playing games, which of course is one of the main topics of this channel. So now that we're out and we're on our way, let's go ahead and talk about the rant. So what this channel was asking about was, you know, a lot of people have made the claim, and I agree with it. This is the assertion, I guess. They feel like, you know, D&D, I'm sorry, not D&D. They feel like a lot of the movie franchises are getting pretty firmly away from, you know, the way things were originally, right? So the Star Wars movies, there's a lot about them that's different now, and the even compared to the prequel as well as the original trilogy, the ones today are very, very different. And of course, comic books are wildly different today, and a lot of them are frankly bad, or just objectively bad, right? The stories aren't any good, the characters aren't compelling, a lot of the plots are very contrived. Um, the writers clearly want a certain ending to come about, and they will just force plot points to happen even though they make absolutely no sense whatsoever because they want their ending. Um, this is actually tangentially but still very closely related to what we talked about in the previous episode where I talked about the die rolls, right? In the sense that some game masters and some players have that when that there's a story that's objectively supposed to happen and that it's bad when the dice say that it doesn't, right? That the dice can be wrong because you know what the story should be, and if the dice are telling you something different, you should overrule them. And of course, my position is that what the dice say is part of the story, and you should respond to that. Um, and that's what we were talking about in the last episode. And although you're not using dice usually to write a comic book or a movie script or something like that, or a novel, it is true that a lot of writers have trouble just letting the logical thing happen that makes the most sense in this moment. And if that's not the story they want to tell, they will try to force it. And a lot of companies these days are doing this sort of thing. And so the interviewer was asking Dan DiDio why this is happening just sort of across comics, across movies. And Dan DiDio's answer was quite interesting. And as soon as he said it, I immediately thought this applies to Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons, although I don't think it applies to most of the smaller companies, and we'll see why as we go through it. So what Dan DiDio said is that the reason comics are so bad now, and nobody and the fans don't want to read them anymore. What they were talking about, by the way, was the fact that in America, in the United States, American comics make up a very small minority of comic sales in the United States. And let me let you take a moment, maybe pause the video to guess which country's comics are dominating the comic market in the United States, and it's not the US. So hopefully you've thought about it, and probably the answer is really easy. Japanese. Manga is now over, I think, 80% of the comic book sales market. The comic book sales, 80% of the comic book market in the United States is manga. I think it might be even as high as almost 89%, but it's I think over 80. It's a huge chunk. The overwhelming majority of comic sales are manga in the United States. People just aren't buying mainstream comics that were produced by the American publishers, Marvel and DC and Impulse and stuff like that anymore. And so this person was asking about that because that's, sort of part of it. And what Dan DiDio said was that the comic companies aren't producing the sorts of comics that people want to read, so they're turning to manga, right? And so then the person interviewing him said, why do you think that the comic companies have lost the ability to produce the sorts of comics that the people reading comics want to read? Like, shouldn't they know how to do this? And DiDio said something very interesting. Is this guy brake checking me? What a jerk. DiDio said something very interesting, profound, and I guess, as I said, accurate to, I think, Wizards of the Coast. What he said was, it's because the people in charge of these companies don't know anything about the product. Right? Years ago, the people who ran DC and Marvel came from the ranks of the comic book creators. Dick Giordano was an inker before he was the vice president of DC Comics. Jim Shooter was a writer before he became editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. Archie Goodwin was both a writer and a regular editor of comics before he was put in charge of Marvel, which was before Jim Shooter was in charge. Mark Grunwald was a writer for Captain America for years and years and years before he became the executive editor, whatever, and eventually took over, I think, for Jim Shooter when Jim Shooter left. And he continued to write the Captain America comic after he was made a managing editor. And most of these writers and inkers and artists, George Perez and so on, they grew up as fans of the original comics that were aimed at children when they were kids. And so they continued to produce comic books that were similar to the ones that they grew up on, because you had essentially former fans who got into the field because they were fans, then became creators, and then became managers. Now, a lot of these companies weren't managed super well, in part because these managers weren't managers first and didn't have a lot of business experience. But the products they put out were loved by the fans because they knew the product. They were consumers of that product before they were creators of it and before they were managers. And so what Didio is saying is that a lot of companies now will hire people from outside the industry who don't know anything about the industry itself, but have a lot of experience at management and stuff. And those people come into the company and they aren't consumers of what they're producing, so they don't have any idea what people would like. Right? And as soon as I heard this, I said, this is what's going on in Dungeons and Dragons. The people running Wizards of the Coast and running Dungeons and Dragons itself came from like the games division and the sales division of like Microsoft and stuff, or Apple, right? They didn't come from a role-playing game background. And Lorraine Williamson, is it her name? Or is it Cynthia? I can't remember. The woman who's in charge of WotC, right, Wizards of the Coast, I'm fairly sure she admitted she's never played a game of D&D. She's never played a session. She doesn't know anything about it, right? If you sat the people who run Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons down and you gave them an oral quiz, they would fail it. If you said to them, what's the difference between a hit point and an experience point, they wouldn't be able to answer you. If you asked them, is a 15 difficulty class a hard or easy skill roll, they wouldn't be able to tell you. If you asked them, what's a proficiency bonus and what value does it take at first level, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. I bet they couldn't name the 6 attributes, ability scores, right? They don't know anything about this stuff because they've never played it. They aren't consumers of the product. So when they greenlight projects, they don't know what we're going to like. What they're greenlighting is something that would work in their old business, or that the business school tells them would work, right? They're greenlighting something that they think will cause microtransactions. That's what they're doing. And so exactly how this works regarding like fans and whether fans would like it, they have no idea, right? And I guess the same thing is true in comics, where again you have people who are not fans of comics who are trying to tell the editors and the writers who might have been still fans how to create the comics to quote unquote appeal to a wider audience. And mostly what happens is these new people come in and they decide that they have to grow the company, right? Because that's how they make their bones. And so in order to grow the company, they decide we have to change, we have to get a whole new audience in, right? We have to have more customers. We can't just stay with the existing customer base. We have to have more, okay? And then what they decide is, in order to do this, it's okay to do things that will PO the existing customers. We have them already. Well, we want our new ones, right? And they're constantly chasing the new customer. And I mean, this happened in Star Wars Galaxies, right? When Star Wars Galaxies couldn't break the 250, 300,000 user mark, and World of Warcraft went up over 1 million. What did Star Wars Galaxies do? They created the new game experience, the NGE. That was not the brainchild of the existing developers who were trying to make the game better. That was the brainchild of the managers who saw the numbers of World of Warcraft and said, we want numbers like that. And in order to get numbers like that, we think what you need to do is change the game to make it play like World of Warcraft. And I'm fairly sure in the story that I read that a number of the developers who had been with Star Wars Galaxies for a while warned them, this is not going to work. You're going to alienate the existing player base, and there isn't any practical way, given the way Star Wars Galaxies is designed, that we could really make it a World of Warcraft clone. We would have to basically shut the whole game down and start over. And nobody wanted to shut the whole game down and start over, so they just, wallpapered over the cracks and stuff and made what seemed like a World of Warcraft clone that was not really a World of Warcraft clone, but was no longer Star Wars Galaxies, right? It was the suits in what they call the C-suite, right? The executive suite. Those are the guys who made that decision, but they weren't playing their own game. And they weren't playing any MMOs at all, right? They were just people who thought they knew how these things worked. And obviously they were wrong, because Star Wars Galaxies went from limping along at about 175,000 users instead of the 300 plus that they'd had at its peak to like under 50,000 in a matter of months. And it never recovered. And it limped along in maintenance mode from then on. Okay? So this is the same sort of thing that is going on around the media industry, the media world, right? You have lots of, games being produced that players don't like, video games, right? Because, again, the people in charge aren't video gamers and don't know what gamers would like. You have, apparently, it seems like movies being produced by people who don't like again, not the director necessarily, the cinematographer, the actors, but the people calling the shots, the executive producers and stuff, the company execs who are calling all the shots, don't even probably go to the movies. When's the last time you went to a movie and did you like it? Right? And you have people admitting that they are who are running Dungeons and Dragons, admitting that they don't even play their own game. And how can you know what the right direction is for a company when you don't play the game? You're estimating, you're guessing, right? And so I think that's definitely what's going on with Wizards of the Coast. And one of the things I really like about Pinnacle Games is that it is evident that the people who run Pinnacle as a company also play Savage Worlds, which is their flagship game, right? So Shane Hensley, who is responsible for Deadlands and is still one of the higher-ups in the company, there was a live stream where they were talking about the Legend of Ghost Mountain, and Shane was talking about being in a game of it and playing it, right? So he saw firsthand what it's like to play or run. I can't remember if he ran it or played it, but he was right there doing it. I think he was in one game and he ran another one. And he was right there, playing it, seeing how it plays, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, right? And pretty sure Clint Black, who is the sort of lead designer, at one point when he was asked a question about how to run something, he said, well, this is what the rules say, but here's how I run it in my home game, which is a little different from what the rules say, right? So this is somebody who actually plays the game and sees how it plays. They've made a number of small tweaks to the rules since Savage Worlds Adventure Edition came out 4 years ago, and the little addenda and errata and stuff. And they've made actual mechanical changes that they've made because the people who produce the game play it and they saw, ooh, this doesn't actually play the way we thought it did. Let's make some changes. And I think another great example of people not understanding how the game is played would be if you look at, for many published adventures for many companies, not just Wizards of the Coast, the published adventures are almost literally unusable as written by most game masters. And it's not because like the monsters are too hard or the dungeon levels don't make sense. Those are fine, but it's written like a novel. It's written like a narrative. They have chapters, and the chapters have climaxes and stuff. It's written like a novel. And the problem with that, and we talked about this in the last episode, the problem with that is that it makes it very hard for game masters to peel out the information that they need to run the session. Right? Now, in the last episode, I talked about how this gives you the idea that there's some sort of an overarching, externally valid story, and what you're doing is trying to play that story out. But even if that weren't the case, when you're trying to figure out like what goes on in the next scene here, you've got to read paragraphs of dense text the way you would reading a novel, and that's not what you need. So Luke Hart has shown, like in his adventures for his company in the Lair magazine entries and Lairs and Legends, which is his book of adventures and stuff, he was showing it again. He was promoting his materials, but they have bulleted lists, they boldface important terms, they make it short and sweet so that you can look at the bulleted list and in a minute know what you're supposed to be doing as a GM in this scene. And why do they make it like that instead of making it like a novel? Because Luke Hart DMs 2 or 3 different campaigns, and he knows what you need to DM because he's doing it all the time, right? And his other guy, Zach, Goliath Cleric is his login name. He's another one of the Raiders. He also runs a game. You know how I know? Because Luke Hart has talked about what he's done with his character in Goliath Cleric's game, right? So the people working for the DM layer and writing these articles and making adventures are running and playing their own D&D and now Pathfinder games, right? And as a consequence, they know what the consumer of their product wants and needs, which is why Luke Hart puts out a really good product, right? And he's talked about this, how like a lot of companies put out better products than Wizards of the Coast. Why? Because it's they're small companies, and these companies are run by and managed by people who actually play the game and know how the game is played because they play it themselves, right? And that's why I've said before, a lot of the products that come out of Wizards of the Coast, it's just obvious that the people who wrote or at least greenlit the project and then also sort of managed it and everything, they have no earthly idea how people actually play and experience Dungeons and Dragons because they don't play it themselves. And they don't know anybody who does. They're just there because they're managers. And so this is what Dan DiDio was basically talking about, how a lot of... we're running low of fuel, huh? Okay, hang on. Let's go to the map and find a gas station. Why didn't they give me enough fuel? Oh, we're almost there. The gas station is going to be right where we... Yeah, okay. I think we'll be all right. By the time we get to the gas station, we'll be able to dump it off, I think. Hopefully we won't run out of gas. I'm not sure what happens if you do, actually. And we've discovered our, I think it's 4th city in Texas. So we're coming to the end of this delivery and coming to the end of this rant, but yeah, Didio's point is that when you have a business that is run by people who don't consume the product of that business, then they have to rely on market research and focus groups and surveys, all of which is way less accurate than actually consuming the product yourself and being a fan, right? And his point was not just that like DC's management needs to read their own comics to see what they're putting out, but DC's management should be reading Marvel and Image comics, right? And Dynamite comics, because that's how you see what the other people, and they don't just not just read them as market research, but collect them, right? You like Red Sonja, let's start collecting Red Sonja or Deja Thoris. I don't know if they still have that from John Carter, or the Godzilla comics or something. Pick one, be a fan, be a collector, see what it's like to be on the other side of the product and be a collector of comics and a consumer and reader of comics, an enjoyer of comics, a comics hobbyist, so that you can see what it is that your fans like. I've talked about this with video games, how it would probably be very informative for a company like SCS to watch me doing a Let's Play, or many other players. There's a guy named Squirrel who's done Let's Play of Euro Truck, which is a similar game, and Stock of Gloss, who I used to watch, who also did that, and see what's tripping up people, where the bugs are, what the problems are, what's aggravating people, and so forth. I mean, it's so much more informative to pay attention to what people who actually play your game and are fans and consumers of that are experiencing. So either play it yourself or watch other people play it. Either read it yourself or get in there and talk to the people who are actually reading it, not a focus group, but the actual people in the comic book shops, right? Here's a great question to Dan DiDio. When he was president of DC, how often did he step foot in his local comic book shop? Does he even know where it is? Does he know the owner, the manager, the people who work there, the other fans? Because when you're collecting comics, it's not just always about the comic book. Some of it's about the camaraderie of the collecting. So before the pandemic, when I would go to the comic shop all the time, like every couple weeks, I would walk in there and I would chat with the other people. I would talk with the manager, whose name is Jermaine. It's a really awesome guy and super encyclopedic knowledge about comics, and he appreciated my encyclopedic knowledge about Thor and Supergirl and Rom and Crisis on Infinite Earths and stuff like that. And the two of us would just chat about comics, and then one of the other customers would hear us talking, and he would chime in, or she would chime in. Sometimes it was female, it was usually male, but or one of the people who works there would chime in, and it's a whole fandom, and we were fans together, and it's part of the experience, right? Whereas if you're just listening to a focus group, you're not experiencing that if you've not gone to the local comic shop. If you're somebody who runs a movie studio, how often do you not sit in the your own private theater for your private screening of the pre-edit cut of the movie, but how often do you, not for your company but for other companies, just go to the movies as a movie fan and go just watch a cool movie, right? Just go watch it and enjoy it, right? How often do they do that? I don't know. I suspect a lot of them don't do it very often. And I think that's why we get this sort of thing. And it's the same thing with, what's her name, Cynthia Williams? I can't remember. Chris Cox and these other people who run the company of Wizard of the Coast and the division of D&D. How often do you guys actually play D&D? When's the last time you went to a role-playing game convention like Gen Con or Genghis Con? And just see what people are up to and how they experience your game. Just sit there and watch people playing games, right? How often have you done that? I suspect not very often. And this was Didio's point, that if you're not experiencing, if you're not a consumer of the product, it's very hard for you to produce a good product that the consumers will like. And he said that's what he thinks is happening now, is that the people who are in charge are not consumers of the products they're creating, and consequently they really don't have any real idea of what we would or wouldn't like. So anyway, that's what Dan DiDio thinks. What do you think? Leave comments and talk to me about what your experiences are. Speaking of experience, we have just leveled up, and we have the ability to spend some skill points. I'm going to increase the long distance. I think we have one more skill point we don't care about fuel economy right now, so we're going to do... that's weird. How come we can't... Oh, we can click one of these. I think, well, let's do high value cargo. And we'll apply it. So that puts us at 3rd level. And we now have rank 2, so we can deliver up to 650 miles. Right? What we ultimately want to do here is... is get, how do I scroll down? Is get to rank 6, which is greater than 2,500 miles. It's basically as far as the map goes. Fragile cargo, don't really care about that much. Just in time. I usually do these 2 last. Hazardous cargo is worth a lot of money. Fragile cargo is 2, but I usually go high value, long distance, and hazardous, and then fuel economy once we have a truck, which can help a lot because it'll save fuel and therefore make things a lot easier for us. There's an email. Which one's the newest one? Visit our showroom in Alamusa. So did they have now, has that now popped up? I don't know where Alamusa is. Might be a smaller city. So I'm not sure. But in any case, at some point we will try for a Western Star truck, but those cost like 100,000, so it will be a while. And this one that you're looking at is probably like 180 or $90,000 truck. So it will be a while before we get this. We're just going to get a day cab, which is usually the cheapest one that doesn't have the like sleeper thing in the back, because we just can't afford it. All right, so hopefully you guys noticed we had Burger King, we had Subway, we had Home Depot, we had Honeywell. So hopefully you noticed the logos of the real world stuff. That's pretty cool. The mod's working really well, and I didn't notice any conflicts with it. We're sitting here at $20,000, so we're moving along to eventually purchase a truck. Do we have, can we see under truck dealers? Maybe this shows it. There it is. So Colorado. So we're going to need to get out there at some point to visit the dealer. I think we can purchase without having to physically go there because you don't have a truck to use before you purchase one. But we will be doing that eventually. Can we? Oh, we can visit them. Let me just show you. Let's go ahead and visit. Yeah. Because you can visit the first dealer. So this is probably the truck we're going to get. Right, it is 118,000. It's just a day cab, right? It doesn't have anything on the back to for us to sleep, right? So when we go to sleep, we're going to be just sleeping in our seat. Doesn't really affect anything. So this is the 57X, the 49X, also 118,000. So let's take a look. They're both 370 horsepower, so they're pretty much the same basic truck, and that's what we're going to start with. Then a little bit better is the 5700 XE, but it's still a day cab, 122,000. Then with more horsepower is the 49X day cab. Then if we push up, now we have our sleeper, right? Is small, it's not luxurious, but we do have a little bit of something in the back that we can use to sleep in. Can't show you the inside. This is another sleeper, right? They're slowly getting better. Now you see, okay, compare it to this one, to that one. You see how much wider it is in the back. So that's like an extended sleeper. So there's a lot more room in the back. Then there's this one. And then that's the big one. 200,000 for this 5700 XE. That's the one we eventually want to get. But to start with, obviously we have to start with this one. And then what I'm going to do is buy a truck from each of the other companies. We will hand these trucks off one at a time to our other drivers as we hire them, and eventually we'll come back to Western Star and get this one. We'll probably color it differently, but this will then be our main truck that we drive, and then when I buy other trucks, I'll just give them to my other drivers probably. But that's a long way away. We're only at 100. We're only at 20,000 and we need 118. So we got another 100,000 to go, which is probably going to be another 10 episodes. So until the next time I come up with a rant, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been American Truck Simulator. Let's rant.